The Bureau of Statistics has revised its methodology for calculating labor force as far as unemployment is concerned in Nigeria. We've got a special report from Nkechi Nana, our correspondent.
Hiatus, the National Bureau of Statistics releases its labor force survey report showing a significant shift in its unemployment figures. The unemployment rate experienced a dramatic drop from 33.3% in 2020 to 5.3% in Q4 of 2022 and 4.1% in the first quarter of 2023. But there's a twist to this story that unveils a tale of a methodological change and its impact on the nation's workforce statistics. The disparities between the 2020 figures and the current ones are attributed to the adoption of a new methodology in the labor force survey.
But after the publication that we have during the COVID-19 era or period, that is Q4 2020 labor force figure, which was significantly reduced by the COVID-19 lockdown, it became necessary for us to re-examine the methodology and approach for conducting the labor force survey. The new standards recognize all forms of work carried out, whether the work is being paid or unpaid, and then, as we said, we want to be able to integrate with GDP and other data in the country. These issues, among others, limitations, form the main cause why we are changing to this new methodology.
Some of the changes include increasing the size of the sample to represent more people, which gave rise to these figures. The data collection for the revised NLFS is based on a sample of 35,520 households. The new standard also recognizes the working age population as persons aged 15 years and above, as opposed to the former age capped at 64. In regards to the working hours, the NBS new standard defines the unemployed as persons within the labor force who within the reference period, 7 days, did not work for pay or profit for a minimum of 1 hour.
Working age population, as seen in the presentation and the documentary itself, this was defined previously as people aged 15 to 64. But with this new concept and definition that we are using, which is what is applicable all over other countries, we are changing it to 15 years and above. We are not capping it at 64 again. What about the unemployed? These appear to be the most controversial among the changes that we are announcing and that will be seen today. The new standard defines unemployment as persons within the labor force, who within the 7 days reference period did not work for pay or profit for a minimum of 1 hour.
A country's unemployment data is a major indicator that measures the performance of any economy and helps to hold politicians and policymakers accountable for their promises. As Nigeria navigates through this dynamic landscape, the importance of a more comprehensive picture of the labor market to make better policy decisions is required. Nkechi Nana, Arise News.
All right, joining us now to discuss further, Professor Uche Uwaleke, who is the Director, Institute of Capital Market Studies at Nasarawa State University. He joins us from our Abuja studios. Professor, good morning to you. Thank you so much for joining us. Is there any reason for controversy when this methodology is based on international standards from ILO?
Thanks, Rotus. Good morning, and thank you for inviting me. Well, the first is to commend the National Bureau of Statistics for concluding this assignment. I understand it's an assignment that started since 2021. With the support of the ILO and the World Bank, they've been able to conclude that. So I commend them, for it. Of course, Nigeria is a member of the global community, and there is need to also align what we do with that of the rest of the world. If anything, it makes for comparison. And if you also, on that note, if you check the unemployment figures for countries around us, especially in West Africa, you will also find that they are, hovering within, that range. So, as I said earlier on, it makes for comparison and it's good to, be in alignment. It's akin to even what we do, in the academia. If you're writing a research, if you're conducting research, you are expected to adopt a particular writing style. Again, in line with global standards. For those of us in the social and management sciences, you are expected to use the American Psychological Association style, the 7th edition. So that in itself, enables, benchmarking, enables comparison. But having said that, I think what has happened is that ultimately, it would appear that the MBS, lowered the bar, with respect to computing unemployment rate, the bar was significantly lowered. Because even in the report, you find the MBS defining unemployment, as the proportion of the labor force that is unemployed. And then who are these people that are unemployed? The working age, 15 years, and above. So what they have done, as I said earlier on, is to expand that base, that denominator. Proportion means you're talking about a ratio. You have a numerator, which is the unemployed, and then you have a denominator, which is the both unemployed and employed, because labor force comprises unemployed and employed. So if you had, for example, 10 over 100, the 100 is the base. That gives you, 10%. If you now expand that base, okay, instead of saying 10 over 100, you now say 10 over 200. Of course, you now have a rate that is lower. So what they did in the case of the unemployment rate, the current one that is being used is to expand the denominator, which is that labor force. So instead of saying the age bracket between 15 and 64 as we used to have it, they now removed the limit. It's now 15 and to infinity, if you like. So that expanded the base, and then of course you now have that situation. And they also succeeded in also reducing the numerator, okay? Because the numerator, remember, is unemployed. So instead of saying the previous definition that said if you didn't work for 20 hours, you were unemployed, this one they now said just 1 hour. If you worked for 1 hour, you were employed, but less than 1 hour, that meant you were unemployed. Again, that was also narrowed. So when you narrow the numerator and expand the denominator, the result is, what we have, very, very low figure for the unemployment rate. So for me, it's a case of lowering the bar.
Okay, lowering the bar. So what does this calculation do to Nigeria's misery index, which of course takes the seasonally adjusted unemployment and adds it to inflation? How do we look at the misery index now going forward? Does anything change at all?
Yeah, of course it will change. If you consider the fact that unemployment rate and the inflation rate, go into the computation of, the misery index and, living standards, go into the computation of living index. So when you have a lower unemployment rate official number, it also means that you're also going to report a lower misery index. And that is where the problem lies, okay? The potential to create a very erroneous impression of the true situation that is on ground. Rotus also look at it this way. You are an economist, Rotus. You understand that there's a relationship between unemployment and productivity, unemployment and GDP growth, for example. What is that relationship? The relationship is inverse, okay? The lower the unemployment, the unemployment and GDP, the higher the GDP, okay? Because if GDP is high, that means aggregate demand is high, Keynesian theory, and then you now have lower unemployment rate. But what has happened in this case? If you check the GDP figure for Q4 of 2022, NBS reported 3.52%. And you check the GDP figure for Q1 of 2023, NBS reported 2.31%. So between quarter 4 of 2022 and quarter 1 of 2023, GDP fell from 3.52 to 2.51. But what are we being told now? That is why I'm also questioning even the numbers. What we have now is a case of unemployment, dropping from 5.3%, according to the new methodology, in quarter 4 of 2024 to 4.1 in quarter 1 of 2023. So I am saying that there's a problem there. You can't have a situation where unemployment is dropping and GDP is you're also reporting that GDP is dropping, because the relationship is inverse. That has been well established even in literature. I'm sure you're familiar with the Okun's law, OKUN. Okun's law in economics, talks about the inverse relationship between unemployment and GDP. So if MBS, if MBS reported a drop in GDP between quarter 4 and quarter 1 of 2023, one should also expect that unemployment rates should rise and not fall. That's also where the controversy, part of that controversy. The figures don't add up.
But Professor, this is why we have you on to break these things down for us. So that leads me to stagflation. So does that mean, same question, I know I'm being theoretical here, but if you look at for stagflation, stagnant GDP growth, rising unemployment, rising inflation, also is Nigeria no longer in a stagflation state?
Okay, well, again, I come from the background of theory. Another popular one has to do with the Phillips curve. I'm sure you're also familiar with the Phillips curve. All these theories, laws, came up in the 60s. Phillips curve is also about the relationship between inflation and unemployment. You can also say inflation and GDP, which according to that curve is also inverse. Now, in the case of stagflation, what you find is you have rising inflation, and at the same time you have stagnated growth rate, okay? Or you're having rising inflation and reduction in unemployment. So that's a case of stagflation. GDP growth is not strong, and at the same time you have rising inflation. So what this number, again, which I say doesn't really reflect the true picture. What it also will go to show is that yes, you have a rising inflation, but unemployment rate that is also supposed to be a lot higher, okay, is said to be on the decline. So the numbers, as I said earlier on, are not such that would help policy making, especially at the the macro level. That is where I have my fear, which is also why I'm suggesting here that yes, I made that point earlier. We need to align with international, best practice. At the same time, we also need to recognize that we have, peculiar circumstances, and that is why we need, in addition to this number that has been published by the MBS. Yes, this number should be for external consumption, for our development partners, for foreign investors. Of course, they'll be watching them. Okay, and able to make comparison. But internally, we also need to develop our own country-specific threshold. Okay, for example, the DMO. The DMO says the debt to GDP ratio, international threshold is 56%, for example. But the DMO has also set for itself a country-specific threshold of 30%. So that puts you on the guard. Provides like a guide rail. In our own case now, the unemployment rate that we have, if we use it to make any policy decision, we will be wrong. Okay, so what is the way forward? The way forward is to also have, even if you're using the old methodology, get out what the number should be for purpose of making decisions here. And that is why it's akin to what companies do. Corporates prepare 2 sets of accounts, the financial, publish financial statements for external use, and then management accounts for the management of the company to be able to make decisions affecting the company. So we also need, an unemployment number from the same MBS that more or less approximates the true situation, which the government can now use to make decisions. Because relying on this 4.1%, come to think of it, what they're saying is that out of 100, if 100 is your labor force, okay, that's just 4 out of 100, represents the people that are unemployed. Does that appear realistic?
It does not.
Yes.
It does
so
not.
that's the implication, and that's why we need to have another set of number the government meant for National Assembly for them to now use to make their decision. Because if you check the National Development Plan, it says there the government intends to reduce the unemployment rate. They were even using the old one, 27.1%. After that we had 33.3 to 19.6%. Okay, by 2025. If the National Development Plan for 2021-2025 is targeting 19.6% by 2025. And already you have 4.1.
4%.
The government can go to sleep. Yes,
Professor.
Yes. What do you do?
Exactly.
So it encourages complacency. They will simply say they've achieved their target, let them go home and sleep.
Professor Uwaleke, it's always a pleasure having you on the show. Thank you so much for breaking these matters down for us. We appreciate your time. Professor, of course, head of the Institute of Capital Markets over at Nasarawa State University.